The following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it's Friday afternoon, and we're going to be talking about money. You know, China's stock market's almost in free fall. They had their worst month ever in the month of July. So what's going on? What's happening? What's happening in China? You know, we've been talking about China for the last 5 or 6 years and what happens there. So what really is going on? I think we see China, or a lot of people see China through American eyes. I want to give you some insights about China, what has happened to get them to where they are, and what's going on now. I draw a lot of the information from a book written by Henry Kressel and Tom Lento, a book called Entrepreneurship in a Global Economy. But before we get to China, I want to give you the very big picture, a worldwide picture. It's one I've talked about for the last 5 or 6 years. It's been going on, but I think it's useful to look back all the time, to look at a long-term strategy, a long-term growth that is very, very significant. Standard Chartered Bank did a study, I don't know, it's been maybe 6 years ago, Standard Chartered Bank out of the UK, in which they identified periods of time where the world economy grew more rapidly than the average, significantly more than the average. The first cycle was from 1870 to 1913, a period of 43 years, in which the economy was driven primarily by the industrialization of the United States. But that affected the rest of the world as well. You know, even during that time, we went through the 1874 financial crisis, a crisis that was much worse than we went through today and lasted for a lot longer than the one we just went through. It was a painful time. We shifted, however, from an agricultural society to an industrial society, and that drove the rest of the world. The second cycle, from 1945 to 1970, it was the rebuilding of Europe, the rebuilding of Eastern Asia, of Asia. It was a relatively mild business cycles, but it was a growth which saw wealth grow in countries like the US and the UK and France and Germany. The stock market went from 150 to over 1,000 during that time, and we saw the death of the colonial system. We saw the building of the infrastructure, the interstate highway system, and a lot of airports. We saw the Cold War and the competition with the USSR. Standard Chartered Bank said, given those times and given what's happened, there is another supercycle that began in 2009, and this one will carry for 15 or 20 or 25 years. And I think that that's really true. It's going to be driven by the emerging nations because 93% of the world's middle class will live in those emerging nations by the year 2030. So that lays the overall framework of what we're talking about in terms of China fits into that, the US fits into that, Europe fits into that. But in particular, I want to focus on China because 40 years ago, a little over 40 years ago, China was a rural nation, agricultural nation. And in 40 years, they've grown from that kind of an economy to the second largest economy in the world, second only to the United States. They exemplify the supercycle. The winners are going to be global. The winners are going to be those countries which can grow their GDP much faster than average, but there's also going to be big risk during that whole time. But China fits that case. And China has done a remarkable job. 40 years from a backward economy to one of the world's great economies. But it's not without precedent. And I think to see where they are and what the risks are in that economy, there's an analogy that can be made. It's, I believe that history doesn't repeat, but that it rhymes. And we can look back to another time when another country was going through the same transformation that China's gone through. Louis XIV in France began his reign in 1661. He began and became king at a time when they were winding down a period of 3 major wars and 2 minor wars. France was heavily, heavily in debt. And at those days, they had no paper money. So you had to use actual specie, actual gold and silver. But France had no mines. In order to create cash, they had to create a trade surplus. Henry chose Jean-Baptiste Colbert in 1665 as his treasury secretary, in charge of the treasury. And Colbert took over at a time when France, their industry was primarily small craft shops, one-man shops, primarily backwards. They didn't compete on a world stage. The quality wasn't great. It was just kind of a mediocre kind of economy. But Colbert set out to fix that. He was going to build industries like glassmaking and textiles. He set up to restrict imports, and he set up to promote exports. He wanted to export exceptionally fine products, which didn't exist in France at the time that he took over. Colbert was ruthless, he was determined, he was able, and he had the full financial force of France. So he went out, and he went searching for craftsmen and entrepreneurs from various other countries, and he offered very attractive, highly attractive incentives. For many, he offered the royal privilege. That meant they could come to France. They didn't have to pay taxes. The French government would finance the business. The French government would guarantee to buy their products so that they had essentially no risk. Colbert established a group of spies that he sent to England and to Italy and to other countries to search out those craftsmen and steal the secret production machinery and the processes and the technology. And he brought in all the entrepreneurs, all the factories. He began to build factories. In a country that had essentially just one-man shops, he started to build factories to employ over 1,000 workers, something that was completely new in France. He was paying those workers, and most of the workers in France, most of the people in France were farmers. They'd grown up around agriculture. They were rural-type workers. He brought them into the factories. He paid minimum wages. He forced them to live in dormitories. He worked them 14 to 16 hours a day. And the only days that they had off, they didn't have weekends off. They didn't have one day of the weekend. The only days off they had were religious holidays. And Colbert got into a big dispute with the Roman Catholics because he said the Catholics had too many religious holidays. He wanted the workers to work those days. He wanted to encourage women to marry before they reached the age of 20 because he wanted them to create additional workers to work in the factories. He established a corps of state-funded industrial inspectors to go out and check the quality of the products that were being produced. And he set up to protect the businesses from outside competition. At that time, the Dutch dominated international trade. Colbert built a merchant navy. He purchased ships that were to carry the French products, and they charged extra if you were not a ship built in France, a ship for French products. Very high fees for foreign vessels. And the French industries, these industries that Colbert put together, became renowned for their quality, especially for luxury products, for silk, for tapestries, for fine glass. The Gobelin tapestry is noted worldwide as some of the greatest in the world. Saint-Gobain glass maker, established at that time. All those factories were some of the great factories. Colbert launched France in a very short time on a path of large-scale industrialization. It's a system called mercantilism, and it applies today. We may be living, actually, in the age of golden mercantilism. For all that said, Jean-Baptiste Colbert was thoroughly nasty. He was widely hated both inside and outside of France. And for those workers, for those people that he recruited to protect from outside competition, for those entrepreneurs, if you decided to leave France, those people were arrested and ended up either in prison or rowing the King's Gallery or were executed. In fact, 15,000 small entrepreneurs were executed for the simple crime that they were using foreign-made materials. That was how Colbert drove an economy from almost nothing to a worldwide financial mega country. We see some of those same patterns in China. And we're coming up to the commercial break. I'm going to talk about now the same kind of things that have gone on in China that went on in France. Don't go away, because now we'll put it into China and the risk that are involved with that. I'll be right back after the commercial break. Don't go away.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our clients' interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your seven-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com at 4:30 p.m.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So I've been drawing the parallel between France and what happened under Colbert and China. And I want to bring it down specifically to China because we live probably in the golden age of mercantilism. China has done an astonishing work going from an agricultural society to the second largest economy in the world. And they adapted that approach, just as France adapted the approach to do that. If you look at the ruling Communist Party, they control the land, they control most of the economy, they control the military, they own the banks, they control foreign policy, they can do what they can set whatever they feel is of major importance, and they can adopt some capitalist approaches and practices without ever giving up control. By owning the banks, they can decide who gets loans and who does not get loans. They can decide to make loans whether a business is making money or losing money, whether it's a business that should be out of work, out of area in bankruptcy, or whether it makes a ton of money. They can channel capital into to meet industrial objectives that the Communist Party has. Not that demand is there, but they can channel that capital to meet their industrial priorities. And they can keep away foreign influence. They can keep foreign companies and foreign investment out. The ruling party also controls the infrastructure. They own all the land. They decide where the airports are going to be. They decide what the roads are going to be built, the railways, the public structures. And they don't have any legal restrictions as to what they do. They decide they want to put in a road, they put in a road. They can build an entire city, and we've seen that. Building a city for millions of people, and before the city is complete, you do not have a single person living there, but within a very short period of time, it's completely inhabited. The development is not accidental. They have a long-term development plan, and the government has complete control over key industries. They can promote exports, and they run into trouble every once in a while with the WTO because they support some of those industries. They create a trade surplus. That's a lot of their focus, is to bring in outside money through a trade surplus. The government can go out and acquire technology, and they do that through the industries, and they build a domestic base capable of innovation. The Communist Party controls the large companies in critical industries, from telecommunications to the aviation industry. Those companies are either fully government-owned or majority government-owned. The government has ultimate control of those companies, and many of those companies actually trade on the stock market, even with government control. Non-critical industries are left free to do what they want to do, but they give significant incentives for foreign manufacturing, just like Colbert did. They give low labor cost, they build the infrastructure, they convince companies to move manufacturing facilities into the country, and they actually will support exports and support the sale of goods. 70% of their exports are coming from plants that were relocated from another country into China. Think about one example, a company called Foxconn, Chinese-owned. It employs 100,000 workers. They make just Apple products. Every bit of their production is exported. The workers are put into dorms in a city. They're paid minimal wages, and their workforce is absolutely controlled. They're locked in. Not that dissimilar from what Colbert was doing in France, moving people from the rural areas to make them workers in the factory. I once knew a guy that went to work for American Standard making toilets. And his workforce was a workforce of people that had never in their life seen a toilet before. But they were moved into dormitories. They were paid a minimum wage, but they were paid a wage, much better than they'd received in their agricultural life. And they began to make toilets, which were then shipped, or toilet bowls, and whatever goes into that, bathtubs, whatever. They'd never seen any of the products that were made by American Standard. Those products were made, and most of those products were shipped out of the country. Like Colbert, they go after the latest technology. And one of the great examples is the high-speed trains. You know, you have the high-speed trains in Europe, the TGV in France. You have companies that actually are the manufacturers of those. You have the Dutch, you have the Japanese, and the Chinese form joint ventures between Chinese companies and the Dutch, between the Chinese and the Japanese. Chinese companies owned a significant part of those joint ventures. They put in the high-speed trains, and then suddenly, when there were bids from other countries that wanted to put in high-speed trains, as well as Chinese, there were new Chinese companies that were formed that made a few small improvements on the technology, but they essentially claimed that because of those very small improvements, they now owned the technology and could compete, just like Colbert. The Chinese example is something that has drawn attention worldwide, and we're seeing that not just in China, we're seeing it applied in Brazil, and Malaysia and India and Thailand and Vietnam. And in Vietnam, there's a great example of the risk of that kind of a technology because Vietnam decided they wanted to do shipbuilding. But the problem is they're government-owned entities. There's no profit incentive, and it's the taxpayer who bails out the companies. It's the taxpayer. When they have big losses, it's the taxpayer that makes up those losses. The state-owned company very easily can become unprofitable, but because they're considered important to the national objectives, they're continued to operate even at significant losses. That's true. The Vietnam Shipbuilding Industries Group has incurred multi-billion dollars of debts and losses, and the losses continue to balloon without ever being taken care of. But the type of business is spreading, and it's difficult to compete in certain industries when that happens. I say for my clients, we don't diversify into internationally owned companies. We can compete using American companies that do business internationally, but we invest where we can see the control. Americans tend to see the world through American eyes. We tend to see the world and the growth of countries like Brazil and Russia and China and India, thinking that they're growing the same way we do. We have an economy that's demand-driven. It's demand which determines what companies succeed and what companies don't succeed. It's demand which determines the allocation of resources. It's not the U.S. government. In a mercantilism economy, it's the government which determines what's important and what's not important. China's one example, but there are other countries, and many of the BRIC countries are mercantilism driven. Think about it. That was a concept that was derived by the guy from Goldman Sachs who said that those economies are growing very fast, and they are growing very fast. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Of course, Russia's fallen on a few hard times. Maybe China's fallen on a few hard times. It's not a very efficient way of making things happen. That's the story. And now we're seeing the Chinese stock market come apart. I don't think it's a big surprise. I think when you look at the Chinese stock market and the Brazilian markets and some of the other markets where you're getting a mercantilism, the concept of seeing those companies and what they've done and where they're going is something that we don't understand completely through an American lens. I think we've just begun to see what's happening. Anyway, that's my approach on this whole thing. It's an opportunity, but there's a huge risk in investing in international companies, especially when we make those investments through thinking that their companies are going to be restricted, or their companies are going to be responding to, their companies are going to be maximizing profits. That's not their primary objective. Whereas a U.S. company is focused on profits, whether it's public or private, the Chinese companies very often are focused on achieving a national objective, not necessarily a profit objective. The same is true in many other countries, and we're just beginning to see that. I have a great guest. We're coming up to the commercial break, and so don't go away because I want you to hear the guest, what he has to say. He's not from China. It's not a Chinese company. It's an American company. And you're going to hear what he has to say, and it's a very good example of what separates our economy from the Chinese economy, or what separates our economy from the Russian economy or from the Brazilian economy, why we tend to succeed. In many cases, we think we're very inefficient, and in a lot of ways we are inefficient. But when you compare where we are compared to the rest of the world, I kind of think that we have a huge advantage. But we'll come back to that right after the break. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
We're back with more About Money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So welcome back. And I've been talking about China, but I want to shift gears now because I have a guest who has a fascinating story to tell. My guest is Jim Hawk, who is the CEO and founder of Momentum. So welcome to the program, Jim.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
So why don't we start with your background?
Well, I was born and raised in the Midwest. I grew up in a latchkey suburban household in St. Louis. I was trained as a fine artist and then received a master's in architecture, both from the university or from Washington University in St. Louis. I married my high school sweetheart and moved to Seattle in 1990.
So, and why did you move to Seattle, having all that background in St. Louis?
In the 90s, it was tough. The building industry was in a slowdown, and while I had an offer for a job in St. Louis, I also had an offer in Seattle. We had a bit of wanderlust,
okay.
and we wanted to try something different.
So you came to Seattle and went to work for what kind of a company?
I went to work for a national company. There were 24 offices nationwide, architecture, engineering, and related building construction management and services. It was a big company.
And you worked for them for how long?
I worked for them for about 5 years in a design role primarily, mostly government, some corporate, and a little bit of nonprofit work. And I was recruited away. I was recruited away by a small boutique design-oriented company in Seattle, and I spent the next 10 years, and eventually as a principal in charge of design.
So explain the difference between architecture and design.
Boy, that's a great question. So design, I think, is perhaps more all-encompassing, and is kind of the font of creative thought and action. Architecture is specifically oriented towards the built environment, towards space that we can occupy, and as well as open space.
So you went to work for a small boutique firm, and then what happened?
Well, my responsibility increased. I had a lot more role, and I began to get involved with a lot of community institutions, smaller companies that were looking for transformation so that they could compete more effectively, brand-focused, local, nonprofit, community financial institutions, small schools, and companies.
And that led to Momentum somehow.
Yeah, we really saw a lot of situations in which owners were really unprepared to manage the risk of a complicated project. They didn't have the internal expertise to hire all the right players and put them in the right order to get the right information at the right time. It creates frustration, and it can cost. It can cost a lot of money, and so we would, as a design member of that team, oftentimes fill those gaps. But there's not necessarily always fee or scope, and you don't have contract responsibility. So in many cases, it was we would run into situations where great design had challenges as a result of differing priorities and process, which was disjointed. There was really a demand in the marketplace for owners that wanted a holistic approach, all the way from strategy to execution, to be able to provide a comprehensive, a single source for responsibility for a project, to pull together all the team and to implement process to get it all the way from the conceptual stage, the planning stage, through design, and through the build.
So give us an example of a company that's going through this.
Well, we work with a company here in Seattle that is been around since the 1930s. They serve a broad customer base in town. They're a financial institution. Through the recession, they've seen certainly a downturn in business, and now they're positioned and eager to grow and to compete much more effectively. So we help them understand the marketplace with analytics and data, predictive analysis that's product driven, so that they can make good decisions about location. We assist them to negotiate and work through the terms of that space to get the permits. We help them develop a prototype for their facility so that their operations can have consistency and also allow for unique opportunity in a given neighborhood. They have a very hyper-local approach to Seattle. It's a neighborhood-based environment, and there are great distinctions around the city, both culturally and from a business standpoint. And then we help them adapt those spaces and get them built.
So when I hear the term design and build, I think of somebody that kind of puts together design and builds, but you do far more than that, because you look at the market, you look at the makeup, you look at the neighborhood, you look at the people that are involved, the type of demand, and then begin to build out something and take it beyond that step to hire the contractors and to hire the people that put the whole project together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we believe there's an enormous amount of value in an integrated approach. We have a lot of resources in our own firm, design resources, project management resources, and we partner with architects and engineers. We partner with craftsmen, equipment suppliers. We aggregate all these people in order to make sure that the entire project gets put together in the right order as quickly and efficiently as possible. If the client has a single source of responsibility for the overall budget, and that transfers that cost risk from the client to the contractor to us early in the process. It gives the management teams we work with and the boards that approve these projects early the confidence that at the end it's going to come out like they said it was.
So in designing, you just mentioned a financial institution. in designing their locations? Is it to build a cookie cutter kind of thing that would fit everywhere? Or is it each one adapted into a different neighborhood?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Obviously, they want to operate consistently. They want to use the same kinds of technologies. They want to train their people effectively. And they have a brand, and they want that customer experience to be consistent from location to location. But every location has its unique opportunities, its unique characteristics. There are local considerations that need to have space in a facility to be expressed, so that they can really connect directly with the markets they're in. Some of our clients have multi-state footprint, and we've developed, for instance, designs that work in the mountains as well as by the ocean. So San Diego County, for instance, is an enormous place. Corporations have locations all around the country. You have to honor those unique characteristics of place without abandoning the overall brand and consistency of the company.
Fascinating. So if someone wanted to get a hold of you and have you do work for them, how would they do that?
Well, we have a terrific website. Actually in the process of completely redoing it, at momentumbuilds.com. They can certainly reach us there, or they can call me directly at 206-267-1900.
And that's Jim Hawk. But on your website, are you showing some of the clients and some of the work you've done?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have many examples. We've done a lot of work with community institutions, financial institutions. We work with small universities. Michael, pretty much owner-occupied facilities. We work with the people who are going to live in the spaces and work in the spaces they build, and we do that nationwide.
That's great. Thanks for being on the program. Fascinating story. Jim Hawk, Momentum. If you need that, do check their website.
Thank you.
We'll be back after the commercial break. Bye-bye.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with your host, Mike Adams, here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our client's interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your seven-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Financial stability.
About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, I wrapped up. I started talking about China. We've had Jim Hawk of Momentum on here. Wall Street. Everybody talks about Wall Street, but how did Wall Street get its name? Where did it come from? So, you've got to take yourself back to Manhattan Island. It's a little island. It was a little island, 2.3 miles wide, a little over 2.25 miles wide, 13 miles long. You know, today it's 7,654 city blocks. The original name came from Manhattan. the Lenape tribe. They were a Algonquin tribe of Indians. They were called the Delaware Indians. The Dutch West Indies Company settled Manhattan. Settled it in 1609. Henry Hudson came to found the city, called it New Amsterdam. It actually began to build a fortress around the city in 1625. Peter Minuit purchased for goods worth 60 guilders, purchased the land from the Indians, a total price of $24, 1626. But the Indians had no concept of land ownership. They thought the $24 that they were receiving were simply gifts that were being given. They didn't understand that the land was being purchased. Later, when those Indians decided that they wanted the land back because it belonged to everyone, right? They tried to forcibly retake Manhattan. But the Dutch built a wall around the city to keep the Indians out. And that wall we now know as Wall Street. That's where it came from. It has nothing to do with the stock market. It has nothing to do with the financial industry that was going to grow up. It had everything to do with a fortress that was meant to keep the Indians out, because the Indians didn't understand that the $24 they received, the 60 Dutch guilders, that was to purchase the land. They had no land ownership understanding. So how does that stack up? If the Indians had invested the $24, if they'd had the chance, if there'd been a bank there, if there'd been a financial institution there, if they would have invested that $24 at just 7%, today that $24 would be worth how much, do you think? Think about it. How much would it be worth today? In the past, I've talked about if you had a penny and it doubled, that amount doubled every day, how much would you have at the end of 30 days? It's a question I've asked before, right? 1 penny, 2 pennies the second day, 4 pennies the third day. How much would you have? At the end of 30 days, you'd have over $10 million. But $24 invested at 7% today would be worth $4.9 trillion. Not bad had the Indians invested it. That's the equivalent of $644 million per city square block. If it would have been invested at 10% instead of 7%, today they would have $207 quadrillion. Every city block would be worth $27 trillion. That's the value of compounding. In the Manhattan example, it's 386 years. Most of us don't live 386 years. Most of us wouldn't see that in terms of our lifetime. Most of us, But even 25 years makes a big difference. 100,000 invested at 5% will, in 25 years, grow to 322,000. Invested at 10%, it will grow to 985,000. So the difference between 5 and 10% is over threefold. Doesn't seem like 5% makes that big a difference, does it? But if you invest 100,000 at 5%, 322,000, 100,000 at 10%, it will grow tenfold. And if it grows at 15%, you're talking again 3 times more. It will grow to 2.89 million. That's how compounding works. That's Wall Street. That's what Wall Street should be doing. That was the investment the Indians could have made had they realized those were not just gifts, but they would have invested. There's another thing that I just read about. I thought I would share with you too. Listerine. It seems strange to talk about Listerine, but do you know the story? Listerine was invented in the 19th century, back in the 1800s. It was a powerful surgical antiseptic. They they began to distill it, and they made a floor cleaner, and they made a cure for gonorrhea out of Listerine. Those were the original ideas. They didn't have very many sales, like 115,000 in the 1920s is what they had sold. But somebody came up with the idea of pitching Listerine as a solution to chronic halitosis. Chronic halitosis was an obscure medical term for bad breath back in those days. And it was not a very prominent thing. Most people didn't think much about bad breath. It was just a fact of life. But the company that owned Listerine came up with this idea, and they began to put together ads showing a very sad young woman and a few men as well, eager for marriage, but turned off by their mates or potential mates' rotten breath. And the slogan, "Can I be happy with him in spite of that? Can I be happy with her in spite of that?" You know, today we live and we know that, but bad breath was not something that was conventionally considered catastrophic. It wasn't considered much of anything until Listerine came along. Can I be happy with him in spite of his bad breath? Can I be happy with him in spite of his chronic halitosis? You know, Listerine changed all that. There's an advertising scholar by the name of Twitchell who said Listerine didn't make mouthwash as much as it made halitosis. In 7 years, Listerine sales went from $115,000 to $8 million a year. And now you know the rest of the story. Listerine, who would have thought? Can I really live with him in spite of that? Fascinating stories. There's a lot of stories out of history that are fascinating to pick up on. And over the years, we'll hear more of those. If you missed any part of this program, you can pick it up on our website. It'll be posted on our website on the podcast. We also do a blog, and many of these stories are put together in a blog form. You can comment on the blog. You can have your own information. You can make your own comments on the blog on the website. AdamsFinancialConcepts.com, it actually lists blog. You can go in and check that. You can check the podcast of the programs that we've had in the past. And unlike a school thing, there's no test, there's no pop quiz, there's no grade. But we would like to hear your comments on the blogs, your comments on the podcast. Very welcome to hear that. And a lot of the programs will be there, AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. And right now, we're coming to Seafair Weekend. Have a great time. Enjoy the Blue Angels. And I will be back next week.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. That's AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Friday afternoon at 3 for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on Money Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.